Today, we're jumping into the story that changed hip-hop forever. How two kids from Atlanta, with their clothes on backwards, conquered the world, then disappeared from the spotlight before tragedy struck. Kris Kross wasn't just another 90s fad. They were cultural revolutionaries who proved children could dominate hip-hop, selling over 4 million copies of their debut album and touring with Michael Jackson before they could even drive. But behind the infectious energy of Jump and those iconic backwards jeans was a complicated reality that few fans ever glimpsed. As LL Cool J revealed in a 2018 interview, those kids were dealing with adult pressure while still trying to do homework. The industry wasn't built for children, especially in hip-hop. This rare insight from someone who witnessed their rise firsthand hints at the challenges Kris, Mac Daddy Kelly, and Kris, Daddy Mac Smith, faced behind their confident public personas. What makes their story particularly fascinating are the whispers that circulated throughout Atlanta's music scene about tensions between the duo and their mentor Jermaine Dupri as they entered their teenage years. According to former So Def producer Lil Jon, there was always this question of creative control brewing. The kids were growing up and wanted more say in their music, but the formula had already been established. Some industry insiders have suggested that by their third album, the relationship had become strained as the young artists pushed for more authentic self-expression, while Dupri reportedly wanted to maintain the winning formula. Perhaps most intriguing are the rumors about Kris Kelly's struggles that began during the height of their fame. DeBrat, who came up through the same So Def system shortly after Kris Kross, once hinted in a radio interview that success that young changes how you cope with things, and that some people in our circle found ways to numb themselves when the pressure got too intense. While never explicitly confirming when Kelly's substance issues began, these comments from those in their orbit suggest the seeds of his later struggles may have been planted during those whirlwind years of fame. Today, we're unpacking the complete journey of Kris Kross, from that fateful day at Greenbrier Mall when Jermaine Dupri discovered them, through their meteoric rise, their struggle to evolve artistically, and ultimately the tragic overdose that cut Kris Kelly's life short at just 34 years old. The Kris Kross story begins with a chance encounter that sounds almost too perfect to be scripted. In 1991, music producer Jermaine Dupri was shopping at Atlanta's Greenbrier Mall when he spotted two kids, both named Kris, who caught his attention with their distinctive style and confidence. Kris Kelly was 13 years old, and Kris Smith was just 12, hardly the age you'd expect to be discovered for a rap career, especially in the early 90s, when hip-hop was still fighting for mainstream acceptance. What made this discovery particularly remarkable was that Dupri himself was only 19 at the time. Despite his youth, he already had production experience and industry connections through his father, Michael Malden, who was an executive at Columbia Records. Dupri saw something special in these two kids, not just their style, but a natural charisma and presence that he believed could translate to stardom. The mall discovery has become almost mythological in music history, but what's often overlooked is how this moment represented a significant shift in how the industry viewed young performers in hip-hop. Prior to Kris Kross, rap was largely seen as an adult art form, with few artists under 18 achieving mainstream success. Dupri's vision to market authentic hip-hop performed by actual kids was revolutionary for its time. After spotting the two Krises, Dupri approached them and pitched his vision of turning them into rap stars. Both boys were understandably excited by the prospect, though neither could have anticipated just how massive their success would become. Dupri quickly began developing their image and sound, making a crucial decision that would define their public persona, having them wear their clothes backwards. This backwards clothing style wasn't something the boys were already doing when Dupri discovered them. It was a calculated image decision that helped distinguish them in the crowded music marketplace. The gimmick worked brilliantly, creating an instantly recognizable visual identity that complemented their music and appealed to young fans who were eager to emulate their style. Under Dupri's guidance, the duo adopted their stage names. Kris Kelly became Mac Daddy, while Kris Smith was Daddy Mac, and together they formed Kris Kross. The spelling with K's instead of C's was another deliberate branding choice that helped make them more memorable and distinctive in the early 90s hip-hop landscape. What's particularly interesting about this formative period is how much control Dupri exercised over their development. He not only produced their music, but also wrote most of their lyrics, designed their image, and essentially crafted their entire public persona. This level of management was common for young pop acts, but relatively unusual in hip-hop, where authenticity and writing your own rhymes were highly valued. Despite not writing their own material initially, Kelly and Smith brought genuine energy and charisma to their performances. They weren't just puppets being manipulated by industry forces, they were active participants in bringing Dupri's vision to life, adding their own personalities and delivery styles to the material they were given. This partnership between the young producer and the even younger performers would soon yield results beyond what any of them could have imagined, catapulting all three from relative obscurity to the center of pop culture in a matter of months. The speed and scale of what happened next would test their readiness for fame in ways that would shape the rest of their lives and careers. In February 1992, Kris Kross released their debut single Jump, and the impact was immediate and seismic. The track's infectious energy, catchy hook, and the novelty of seeing actual kids delivering legitimate hip-hop created a perfect storm that captivated audiences across demographic lines. Jump rocketed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it remained for an astonishing 8 weeks, one of the longest runs at the top spot for any rap single at that time. What made Jump particularly revolutionary was how it bridged different audiences. The song was embraced by hip-hop fans who appreciated its production values and energy, pop listeners who couldn't resist its catchy hook, and perhaps most significantly, children and teenagers who finally had rap stars their own age to identify with. This cross-demographic appeal helped the single sell over 2 million copies, earning double platinum certification. The music video for Jump further cemented their image and appeal. Featuring the two Krises in their backwards clothing, energetically performing while surrounded by jumping fans, the video received heavy rotation on MTV and BET. For many young viewers, this was their first exposure to hip-hop presented by performers their own age, creating an immediate connection that adult rappers couldn't necessarily provide. Following the massive success of Jump, Kris Kross released their debut album, Totally Crossed Out, in March 1992. The project was a commercial juggernaut, debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200 and eventually selling over 4 million copies in the United States alone. Beyond Jump, the album spawned additional hits like Warm It Up and I Missed the Bus, further establishing the duo's presence on the charts. The backwards clothes trend that Kris Kross pioneered quickly became a national phenomenon. Across America, kids were wearing their jeans and shirts backwards in imitation of their new idols. Schools even began banning the style, inadvertently adding to its rebellious appeal. This fashion statement wasn't just about clothing. It represented a cultural moment where young people were asserting their own identities through style choices that confused and sometimes concerned adults. At the height of their fame, Kris Kross was selected as the opening act for Michael Jackson's Dangerous World Tour in 1992. For two teenagers who had been ordinary mallgoers just months earlier, sharing a stage with the King of Pop represented an extraordinary ascent. This opportunity exposed them to international audiences and stadium-sized crowds, experiences that few performers of any age get to enjoy, let alone those still in middle school. Their success also led to various endorsement deals and merchandising opportunities, including a video game for the Sega Game Gear and their own comic book. They appeared on countless magazine covers, television shows, and became household names virtually overnight. For Kelly and Smith, this meant navigating the complexities of fame, media attention, and professional obligations while still going through normal adolescent development. What's particularly noteworthy about this period is how the duo's success helped establish Atlanta as a significant hub for hip-hop. Prior to Kris Kross, the hip-hop landscape had been dominated by artists from New York and Los Angeles. Their breakthrough, along with Jermaine Dupri's emerging reputation as a hitmaker, helped put Atlanta on the map as a city capable of producing commercially viable rap acts, a position it would strengthen throughout the 90s and beyond. However, the intensity and suddenness of their fame also created challenges that would become more apparent as time went on. The pressure to maintain their success, the constraints of their carefully crafted image, and the difficulty of growing up under public scrutiny would all play roles in the complicated next chapter of their story. By 1993, Kris Kross faced the classic child star dilemma: how to grow and evolve while maintaining the appeal that made them famous. Their second album, Da Bomb, released in that year, represented their first attempt to mature their sound and image. The project debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and eventually went platinum, respectable numbers by any standard, but a significant drop from their debut's quadruple platinum status. Da Bomb featured a harder, more aggressive sound than Totally Crossed Out, with tracks like Alright and I'm Real showcasing a grittier edge. This evolution reflected both the changing landscape of hip-hop in the early 90s and the duo's own desire to be taken more seriously as artists rather than being seen as a novelty act. At 14 and 15 years old, they were naturally outgrowing the kid-friendly image that had initially propelled them to fame. The album's relative underperformance compared to their debut highlighted the challenges of transitioning from child stardom to sustained career longevity. Many fans who had embraced the playful energy of Jump were unprepared for or uninterested in a more mature Kris Kross, while hardcore hip-hop fans still viewed them primarily as a pop phenomenon rather than authentic rap artists. This period also saw the duo begin to assert more creative control over their music. While Jermaine Dupri remained their primary producer, Kelly and Smith started contributing more to the writing process, seeking to infuse their work with their own experiences and perspectives, rather than simply performing material written entirely by others. This creative growth was a natural progression, but created tension with the established formula that had brought them success. Their relationship with Dupri remained strong during this period, but the dynamic was evolving. As they entered their mid-teens, the power balance naturally shifted from the complete mentor-protege relationship of their early days toward a more collaborative partnership. Dupri himself was also growing as a producer and executive, beginning to work with other artists and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become his So Safe label empire. The mid-90s hip-hop landscape was changing rapidly around them, with the rise of gangsta rap on the West Coast and the emergence of Wu-Tang Clan and other gritty East Coast acts reshaping audience expectations. In this evolving context, Kris Kross's position became increasingly complicated, too mature for their initial child audience, but still carrying the baggage of their kid-friendly origins in a genre that increasingly valued street credibility. By the time they released their third album, Young, Rich and Dangerous, in 1996, both members were in their late teens and actively working to distance themselves from their earlier image. The backwards clothing was gone, replaced by more conventional hip-hop attire, and their sound had continued to evolve toward harder-edged production and more mature themes. The album produced the moderate hit, Tonight's the Night, but failed to match the commercial performance of their previous releases. This final album, under their original contract with Columbia Records, effectively marked the end of Kris Kross as an active recording duo. While they never officially disbanded, they largely retreated from the public eye following the Young, Rich and Dangerous era, occasionally making appearances at events, but no longer releasing new music or maintaining a consistent public presence. What's particularly poignant about this phase of their career is how it reflected the universal challenges of adolescence, finding your identity, asserting independence, and figuring out who you want to become, but played out on a public stage with commercial consequences. The very qualities that had made them successful as children became constraints as they attempted to grow artistically and personally. For Kelly and Smith, this transition from global superstardom back to relative normalcy during their formative teenage years required significant psychological adjustment. Having experienced fame at its most intense before they were old enough to drive, they now faced the challenge of defining themselves outside the Kris Kross identity that had dominated their young lives. Following the commercial decline of Kris Kross, Kris Kelly and Kris Smith took divergent paths as they navigated early adulthood outside the intense spotlight they had experienced as teenagers. Their post-fame years revealed the different ways former child stars cope with the transition back to more ordinary lives after experiencing extraordinary success. Kris Smith, the younger of the duo, largely embraced life away from the entertainment industry. He pursued education and eventually established himself in the business world, maintaining a relatively low profile compared to his years of fame. This transition, while not without challenges, represented a healthy adaptation to post-celebrity life, with Smith finding purpose and identity beyond his Kris Kris Kross persona. Chris Kelly's journey proved more complicated. He struggled to find stable footing after the group's commercial decline, reportedly battling substance abuse issues that began during his fame years and intensified afterward. According to later reports from his family, Kelly had a long history of drug use, cycling through periods of sobriety and relapse over many years. This pattern is unfortunately common among former child stars, who often turn to substances to cope with the psychological aftermath of early fame and its subsequent loss. Both Kelly and Smith maintained their friendship throughout the years, occasionally appearing together at events related to Atlanta's music scene or 90s hip-hop nostalgia. Their bond, forged through the unique shared experience of childhood stardom, remained intact despite the challenges they faced individually. This enduring connection provided an important source of support, particularly as they navigated the complex emotions associated with watching new generations of artists achieve the kind of success they had once enjoyed. Jermaine Dupri, meanwhile, had built So Def Recordings into a powerhouse label, working with artists like Dabrat, Bow Wow, and Jagged Edge. His continued success in the industry stood in stark contrast to the post-fame trajectories of his first major discoveries. Dupri occasionally spoke about Kris Kross in interviews, always expressing pride in what they had accomplished together, while acknowledging the challenges inherent in transitioning from such early success. In 2013, plans were announced for a So Def 20th anniversary reunion concert that would include a Kris Kross performance. This event generated significant excitement among 90s hip-hop fans and represented a potential comeback moment for Kelly and Smith, who were now in their mid-30s. The prospect of performing their hits for nostalgic audiences offered a chance to reclaim some of the positive aspects of their legacy, while demonstrating their growth as individuals. Tragically, this potential revival was cut short when Chris Kelly was found unresponsive in his Atlanta home on May 1st, 2013. He was rushed to the hospital, but pronounced dead that evening at the age of 34. The medical examiner later determined that his death resulted from a drug overdose with a combination of heroin and cocaine found in his system. This devastating conclusion to Kelly's story highlighted the long-term struggles he had faced since his youth. The news of Kelly's death sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community and among fans who had grown up with Kris Kross's music. Social media was flooded with tributes, with many people sharing memories of jumping around their childhood bedrooms with their clothes on backwards. This outpouring of grief demonstrated how deeply the duo had impacted popular culture, even years after their commercial peak. Chris Smith issued a heartfelt statement following his friend's death, saying, "Chris Kelly was my best friend. He was like a brother. I love him and will miss him dearly." This simple but powerful expression of loss reflected the deep bond that had survived long after the spotlight had dimmed on their shared career. Smith attended Kelly's funeral along with Jermaine Dupri, Dabrat, and other figures from Atlanta's music scene, many wearing their clothes backwards as a final tribute to Kelly's legacy. Kelly's death prompted broader discussions about the welfare of child stars and the music industry's responsibility toward young performers. His struggle with substance abuse, which reportedly began during his fame years, raised questions about the pressures placed on young artists and the lack of support systems in place to help them transition to adulthood after their commercial viability wanes.